Byram Hills Board meeting October 15th, 2019 at 7:45. We'll call this meeting to order and would ask for you to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We appreciate you being here tonight, and we're sorry that we're running a little bit late, but
we would have been later, but we're doing exec after.
That's right, we're going to do exec afterwards. We had an audit committee meeting that delayed us a bit, but it was helpful, and now we're ready to dig right into the agenda. And so we'll come back to executive session at the end. I would ask if there are any comments from the public regarding any items not on the agenda to please speak now. All right, hearing none, I would ask for a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? All right. Motion carried. Next, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agendas for item 6, personnel, item 7, special services, and item 8, business.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and with that, I just want to point out a couple of quick things that we did. First, we want to thank the BHCF because in that consent agenda under business, one of the things we approved was the Instagrant amount of money that comes from the foundation to the district for this school year, $20,000, and it's a really useful way to fund interesting grants that come from the different buildings, and so we look forward to another great year with the BHCF of Instagrants. And then $1,000 from the Armonk Children's Corner, also as a donation to the district. So we appreciate that as well, from their board to the district. And then we also approved adding some additional security guards at the middle school and high school. So that's an important matter that was on the consent agenda. All right.
Also, we had 2 resignations for the purpose of retirement that are important to note. One, Matt Yaruso, who has been a head custodian in the district for a number of decades, and Jane Delvillar, who is the librarian at Coleman Hill. Yeah, I know. She can't stay forever, neither can Matt. We know, we got that, but just 2 really treasured people in this district that we're going to be happy to see retire and go on and enjoy the rest of their lives, but sad that it's not going to include us on a daily basis. But I guess at some point, people do other things. That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so item 9.
Item 9, so Board of Education recognition. This is the time where the governor declares October 21st to 25th the school board recognition week. And we take time during this week to just publicly thank you for everything that you are doing for us and for our children. Of course, there's something sweet from Janine. You have a certificate from me and the New York State School Board Association for your dedicated leadership to public education and continuing service to the children of our community, which board members do send me texts of it taped to the refrigerators, which actually makes me really happy. It's like, this is why I could do this work for a long time, those simple things. And also, on behalf of the district office and the entire administrative association, we give you Byram Hills umbrellas. Do not open them in here, because I'm a little superstitious. I thought about you, and like an umbrella, I'm thinking that each member of this board protects everyone in this district. You are heading our fiduciary.
Getting the metaphor.
We just spent probably an hour and a half going over the fiduciary responsibilities of the district between the Finance Advisory Committee and the Audit Committee, and of course your due diligence regarding all of the oversight of the district. So we really appreciate that and want to thank you for it and congratulate you. And now a little something for the fridge. But before I do this, I know Chris Walsh had wanted to say a few words also.
Yes, thank you, Jen, and I love to get up and just thank you each year. It seems it comes around in the same meeting, but on behalf of the faculty, staff, and administrators of Byram Hills, I really want to thank you for your dedication to our students and all of our programs and the overall experience that we have at Byram Hills. We know that all you get is a soda from Nick's and a lot of late nights.
All right now.
But we really sincerely thank you for all that you do to support everything that we do. So thank you very much. We're very lucky to have you as a school board.
Thank you. President Scott Levy.
Thank you.
Lara, I'm sure she still has hers, even though she moved. Lara Stengel.
fridge.
Mike Sanders.
Thank you. And we're missing Jason and Ira tonight, but
Yes. Mia DiPietro.
they'll be back with us soon.
Very
Have their
nice.
umbrellas?
Yes, I feel like you can take them.
Thank you.
There's a
very
little
much.
poem about an umbrella. Of course, Dwayne, I had to find an umbrella poem. I thought this one was fitting. The umbrella won't stop the rain, but it will help you get out during rainfall. As well as confidence is not going to guarantee your success, but it will give you the opportunity to achieve it. So we thank you for being our umbrella.
Thank you.
And these are the really cool ones that open.
They are.
Upside down.
Don't open it here, Mia.
But you all make it easy for us to do our job.
Yes.
so-
Absolutely, yeah. It's a pleasure when we work with such a high-quality administration and group of faculty and staff. So we appreciate the partnership in making Byram Hills all that it could be.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, we go to our new business item. At least our first new business item. We're going to come back to our second after we do the curriculum conversation, but we're going to first talk about our external audit report for this year. So we invite our colleague Chris from Naraki Smith to come up and address us. And we had the opportunity to speak in audit committee, and so we asked a series of questions and went through the numbers carefully, but it would be great if you can give a summary to the public. And obviously, this is a document that we will share with the entire public, and we encourage community members to look at it because it's really the best financial snapshot of our district in terms of where we stand.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Good evening. My name is Christopher Angata. I am a senior manager with Naraki Smith. Naraki Smith was retained by the district this year to perform the external audit of the district's financial statements. And I'm here this evening to present the results of that audit. Just like to thank the Board of Education for their continuing confidence in our firm, retaining us as your independent auditors. Like I said, Naraki Smith was retained by the district to perform the annual audit of the district's financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2019, in accordance with U.S. generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. We also performed an audit of the district's extra classroom activity funds for the year ended June 30th, 2019. And we look to issue any management findings and recommendations on internal controls and recommendations. As far as the conduct of the audit is concerned, what we like to call audit readiness and responsiveness, there was a satisfactory closing of the books and records by the district this year. We had 3 minor audit adjustments to the financial statements as presented, and while we were on site at the district, we received excellent cooperation. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank both Kelly and Susan for their oversight and their help throughout the course of the audit. Getting into the financial statements, really high-level overview. Our auditor's reports on the financial statements were clean or unmodified opinions, meaning that the district's financial statements present fairly in all material specs with professional standards. The district's financial position, the district is in a good financial position. There was a positive change in fund balance in the general fund for this year. The district performed positively in comparison to the board-approved and voter-approved budget. The district was within the allowable limits for fund balance. It's the 4% limit that New York State has limitations on for fund balance. The capital assets of the district, net of depreciation, totaled $70.7 million. Bonds payable reflect current year payments of $5.2 million. And there was an increase in real property tax and state aid revenue for the year. I'm also happy to say that there were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies as a result of our audit. And we had no current year recommendations as a result of our audit as well. And of the 5 prior year recommendations, 4 of them were fully implemented and 1 is in the process of being implemented. And I thank you for your time this evening. If there's any questions, either from the administration or the Board of Education, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions? We had an opportunity to ask ours, so I think
Yes, absolutely.
we're good.
Thank
We'll
you so
take
much.
it.
Have a great evening.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, so we are going to skip to item 11, which is the curriculum conversation, and then we'll remember to come back afterwards to the budget.
Yes.
Do you have to vote on this? Accept it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
we do.
thank you, Donna. I would make a motion that is important to accept the external audit for the 2018-19 fiscal year, extracurricular activity fund report and management letter.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? All right, thank you again,
good
Donna. Okay.
All right, now to our curriculum conversation, which I'm going to turn over to Tim in just a minute. This is such a nice opportunity, especially the last couple of years, for us to have a discussion with the board about what's happening in our buildings and how our goals are being set. And just to think about, I found the focus again this year to be on leadership, teaching, and learning. And how our administrators are doing that through intense hours prior to our summer retreat and working together and formulating these goals. And then some smaller meetings thereafter to watch how we're going to implement those goals. I think we're really looking at purpose, process, and results. We asked the board to let us be brave a number of years ago, or Tim asked us, I followed Tim, and to be brave and to allow us to move forward instead of just having your standard goals, to come forward with an inquiry question that we thought would drive our work. And what we found over the last couple of years is that inquiry question actually allows us to see the effect of this work on students in our results column. Like, how is this ultimately affecting the kids that we're working with? So we've been really pleased with this document, and it feels like a living document as we're working on it. Maybe a decade ago or so, you would develop your goals, and then you would spend time during the year going back to them to check that you remembered like where you were, and sort of checking them off. It felt more like a checklist and less like an exploration and discovery, which I feel like it really is now. And I think that at any given moment I could tell you what any one of our administrator goals are, because they're actually living those on a daily basis, and it's not just something they're checking. So,
Right.
so
So tonight, we want to explore that a bit. And those inquiry questions were developed as a foundation to our district mission. And that's where they grew from. So we looked at our mission and we said, let's explore an area that, in our department, in our content area, that relates to that. So all these are meant to hold up our mission statement, and ultimately, how do we create productive and responsible citizens of the 21st century? So obviously I want the board to jump in, so feel free to ask questions. This is for you to deepen your understanding of what we're doing in all of our areas throughout our building. And I thought one way to start that conversation was, let me go into the academic chairs and start with them first, and look at this notion of what has really shifted over the last 5 years and the types of learning that's happening in our classrooms. I think we've been experiencing some fundamental shifts in education and in our classrooms. These exploration of our essential questions is allowing that. So I'll start on the end in the back with the chairs, and we'll go through, and I'll start with our social studies chair, Jen Layton. And in your goals, you talk about historical thinking skills, which is different than I remember learning history, which was a lot of memorization of dates and events and battles and things like that. So how is it different? What is historical thinking, and how does that serve students now in supporting 21st century learning?
So really, when you think about what is the work of historians, what they do is they use a thinking process in order to analyze and understand the past. And they do that in a variety of ways, but they really do it by looking at source material. What are the sources left behind for us to understand history? When we analyze those sources, we have to think of things like, what's the context in which that source was created? What was the audience for that source? What was the purpose for that source? And what are the possible limitations? And those are the thinking skills that we have kids use as they access source material to understand the past. But probably more importantly and more relevant for kids is, how can we use those type of skills to understand what we're learning about today's world as well, in terms of social media, on television, what we read on the internet. All those same questions that historians ask about sources from the past are what we want our kids to be asking about what they're viewing today. And so they're critical consumers of information to help them understand and analyze what they know, and then ask questions about what they don't know.
And can you give an example of what that might look like in a classroom?
Sure, so if we're thinking about, one of our favorite units to teach in 10th grade would be about Indian independence under Gandhi, because he's such a dynamic figure. We'd start with a question in which kids are going to create an argument. So you might ask, was Gandhi a success or a failure? And as kids are studying and looking through that, they're going to have to look at all different types of sources. They're going to look at maybe a Hindu nationalist. They're going to look at someone who was a Muslim. What was the British point of view? And so what are all these different sources say about what happened at the time? And how can we use those to develop a more complex understanding? Knowing that we only have so much, we have what's left behind, but how can we ask the right questions for students to start to build an argument about what they understand about the past?
And what's the role then of just facts and content knowledge? Where does that come into play, and is that assessed in the classroom?
I mean, you still need to understand information in which to create your arguments, but the reality is we all know if we forget a fact or a date, we can look it up really quickly. And so how do you find information and remember things? That's really important. But it's really about what you do with that information to create an argument and to create your understanding. That's transferable.
So what you're describing definitely seems very consistent with what a high quality history class would be in a university, where you go really deep into a topic and you use source material. Do you find that if you look at the AP US history curriculum, the world history curriculum, the European history curriculum, is it at this point starting to edge towards this, or is it still more of a survey of how much is the AP curriculum your friend versus how much is it a little bit of a tug of war?
Yeah, so what's great is that the College Board and also our New York State standards changed at the same time to what we'll call conceptual understanding. So this idea that there's big understandings that you need to understand about certain periods of history. Now, how you get to that understanding, there's some choice. So it's not about, I need to memorize these 10 things to demonstrate I know this conceptual understanding. It might be about, here's 2 or 3 case studies that you can explore in order to demonstrate that understanding. And the AP has changed their assessment, so it's about interacting with source material in ways that I described before to demonstrate those skills, but also the conceptual understanding.
And New York State has changed.
Yeah, and the
their
Regents
assessment.
has changed as well,
Changed
too.
as well. Wasn't there a debate about the time period of one of the, was it Métis? Was it world history?
Yeah, they were
And
going, well,
they were going
it used to
narrow, but
be-
they had to expand it, didn't
Yeah, it
they?
used to be 8,000 BCE to the present, so it was only 10,000 years of world history that the kids had to know. But all over the world. And they were going to change it all the way up to 1450, and then they made a compromise, so now the new course is 1,200 to the present. But it gives a little less time and a little more time for exploration. Which is good.
I love the fact that you're getting them out of this myopic view and they're kind of doing a 360 exploration of things. What's that saying, that history's written by the winners?
Yeah,
So this is, a chance to see the other side.
exactly.
It's like a debate almost, where you
Yeah,
have
like
to
whose
make
point
an
of view is
argument from the
missing.
other. Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you. And Melissa, there's also been some shifts in the way language instruction is taking place. I know when I went through Spanish class, I had a steno pad, and on the left I wrote the English word, and on the right I wrote the Spanish word, and I memorized it and took quizzes. And I did that for 180 days for 4 years.
And you
And
don't
I
speak so
kept
well.
speaking. That's my fault, I think. But I think there is something inherent in the instruction that was somewhat flawed. So is that shifting, or do we still?
It is shifting, and I'm going to go off Scott's question. For us, the AP exams have been the guide to the point where New York State hasn't updated their standards since 1996. The AP College Board started their new AP language and culture tests. ACTFL, our American Council on Teaching Foreign Language, partnered with them, and what they came up with were these 3 modes: interpretive, presentational, and interpersonal. And as a result of those 3 modes, New York State is now adopting them. So it's been kind of a nice shift. While there is a part for rote memorization of vocabulary and grammatical fill in the blank with the conjugated verb, it's more of that thematic approach, and how are you using all of the skills of speaking, listening, writing, listening, writing, reading, and we actually at Byram Hills added in the concept of culture as the vehicle to use and learn those skills. So they're having more synthesis, just like Jen's saying, that they're putting it into application. And while they do have to know conjugations that they exist, sometimes they have to look them up. So that spontaneous language that they're producing, whether it's written or more importantly spoken, may not be 100% accurate. However, the kids are now having this desire to engage and actually participate in a conversation. A little different. So we're making them speak as opposed to just writing on their notepads.
Right, right. And what are challenges with that, with just, because it's a shift for teachers as well, I would imagine. So how do we as a teacher have to think differently about the learning experience?
So it's funny because all of our teachers have been, their middle career and they've been trained longer ago. And so they're making those shifts and it's been a challenge, but yet it's been refreshing for a lot of our faculty. So what they're doing is they're finding their passionate area within the target language or the target culture and they're starting there as a stand-up point. The other thing that we've done is we've adopted the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals as a curriculum for us. And if you know anything about them, there's 17 goals that the UN has put forth to solve by the year 2030. And they encompass every problem basically going on everywhere in the world. Lucky for us,
So an example would be climate change, poverty.
Zero hunger, gender equality, health and well-being, any problem that you can imagine the goals cover. And what is good for us as language teachers is that they are in all of the target languages that we are teaching. So the resources are very abundant. The other piece which is good is that when we want to teach that culture concept, we can use really engaging articles and resources for the students. So if you're a kid that's interested in climate action, you can deal with how animals are being affected versus how trees are being affected versus how life underwater is being affected. And we're allowing them to have that choice. So it's a little bit more interesting for them to pick and choose what they want to continue, work on.
And I'm going to jump over to the arts for a moment and go to Deepod, because what you're talking about also reminds me of some of the shift that's happening in the arts with the standards. And you've had a shift too, because your goals sort of speak to some different things. I always viewed, looking at an arts class as learning how to paint or learning how to, draw. But you seem to be shifting toward bringing in the culture piece, like Melissa spoke to. So can you talk a little bit about what the shift is in the arts and why that's important?
Just like in world languages, the New York State Learning Standards for the Arts were written down in 1996 or 1997 and just recently revised. And what they did was they followed what the National Core Standards have done, and they've gone through what they think are 4 major components or anchor standards: creating, presenting or performing, connecting, and responding. So when we think about a traditional arts education, most people think I'm going to go into a chorus and sing. I'll sing 4 songs, I'll do a concert, repeat, and keep on going. That's how it works with band. Or if I go to an art show, or if I go to an art class, I'm going to learn how to make a pinch pot, and then I'm going to have my parents come and see 100 different pinch pots, and then that'll be them. And that happens in many school districts, and we make the best pinch pots here. And, so I'm very proud of what we do here. But what we're doing is we're really focusing on the newer 2 anchor standards. We want students to not only create and present or perform, we want them to really think about responding to the world around them and connecting their art to things outside of the artistic world.
And let me come over back to Dwayne. If you can talk about, in your goals, you talk about authentic learning experiences. And I'm wondering, that seems to me different from what I'm typically here in an English classroom. What does that look like in an English classroom? And is that some type of shift in how we're teaching reading and writing?
Sure.
Literature.
This is a bit of a delicate balance. It's a little bit of a tightrope walk. Most of us remember the English classroom being a place where reading and writing took place, but it was a very transactional relationship in that the reading and the writing that you did oftentimes was really about giving the teacher back what the teacher wanted. So if you read a book like Lord of the Flies, then you had to, in some ways, speak back about what everything symbolized, and it was really a multiple choice type of testing environment where you told the teacher what the conch shell symbolized and everything was fine. Even papers, for instance, were transactional in that it was a two-way street. It was the student writing the paper, the teacher reading it, and giving feedback to that student. I think what we first started looking at when we looked at the new goals was really about 21st century literacy. What does that mean? And so it brings us to what now is what I would consider to be an authentic experience for students, meaning we'd like the writing that students do to, in some ways, resemble what we see in the real world. So you pick up a news feed today if you're on your phone or an iPad or a computer, and writing tends to be multidisciplinary. It tends to have visuals, audios, recordings, podcasts that are all infused within that singular text. That's very different from what we were trained to teach years ago. So much of this is something that the teachers are aspiring to. I see in the classroom students working on podcasting, from everything from how to explain their enjoyment of a summer reading book to teachers using some of the 21st century technology that's available to them to help students create much more visually appealing works that include a lot of writing, a lot of thinking, but also an awareness that an audience needs to be engaged in what they're seeing. You take a 5-paragraph essay and plop it up on the wall, and it's not going to get too many oohs and ahs. But if you take that same 5-paragraph essay and throw it up there with video footage and pictures of Harry Potter, flying over the top of the page, that's very different, and that's what our students are seeing when they open up computers every day.
Some might argue that today's writing maybe isn't as eloquent or sophisticated as more traditional writing. So is there a balance between that? Are we still maintaining
Academic writing.
academic writing? Yeah.
And so
what's
once
the balance
again,
between
that's that tightrope walking. You still need to be able to be a critical thinker.
Right.
You need to be able to dissect literature in ways that are interesting and innovative, and I know that my teachers are always pushing students for unique ideas. It's much harder today. You go into any kind of a Google search engine and type in the book you're reading, and you'll be amazed at what pops up. So I think our teachers have an enormously huge challenge, which is to engage students in literature. I'll give you a good example of something that I did see, which maybe is a little bit peripheral in terms of what you just asked me, Tim, but I was in a classroom where The Great Gatsby was being taught. Students were about halfway through the reading of the novel itself. And this is a novel that many adults in the room probably remember reading as high school students. It may have been a very different reading. The teacher had presented the students with an article about Instagram and about the way that we are in charge of curating our own image today. And the article itself talked about the fact that people on social media tend to present themselves in ways that show all the positives about their lives. They're happy at a party, they're celebrating with friends, and took that same article and said, now can you tell me how this applies to somebody like Gatsby? How is he curating his own image? And from whose perspective are we actually seeing this image? Is it the truth, or is there something else underneath it that becomes that subtext that we need to explore? So even in a very traditional model where you're discussing literature, the ability to bring in that type of a lens makes it, even to me, more authentic, where students can look at Gatsby and say, this is not a book that has to be old and dated and just about 1920s. This is a book that has life today. This is a book that makes me think about my own projection, the image that I put out on social media. And if I can have students walking out of an English classroom thinking that way, that reflective way about their own image, their own consciousness, then I think we're doing a phenomenal job.
That's a great example. So let me go over to Andrew for a moment. Thinking about technology, because you were bringing out that issue of what we put out there in the world about ourselves. And now with technology, that's something we have to talk to kids about. And I know Andrew's been working in our buildings on a digital citizenship curriculum, K-12, so that we can help our kids really understand that exact question is, what is the image that we portray, and the access to information, and this idea of curating who we are in a way. But can you talk, Andrew, a little bit about the digital citizenship curriculum and what's the underlying themes of how we're helping kids today understand and navigate the complexity of technology?
Sure.
The digital citizenship curriculum starts right on day one when they come in as kindergartners, where we start having them think about their digital footprint. And we started by having them actually create footprints that they put on walls, and actually looking at that footprint, and throughout the year putting different sites that they're going to and putting that on their footprint so that they know this is the tracks I have online. The digital citizenship curriculum really focuses on three main things: rights, responsibilities, and rewards. So knowing that students have different rights when they go online, they have different responsibilities when they go online, and then if they stick to that, they have rewards for acting in a ethical way when they're online. Throughout the years, it gets more and more complex. We have at WAMPIS design sprints that the students do, using the design thinking process to dig deep into digital citizenship and what it means for them. In the middle school, they do things like public service announcements around digital citizenship, where they create them in the technology classes and develop these videos that they create. And right up in high school, we started talking about, if you go by the library, you'll see actually posters around digital citizenship along the library hallway. So it's not only just a pull-up curriculum, but it's actually embedded into the everyday. You hear it here when we're talking, just things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis to try to reinforce right behavior online.
Great. And Deb, I notice in your goals you talk about phenomena-based inquiry. And I'm wondering what that is, and is that a shift in how we typically learn science in the classroom?
Yeah, so in many cases it's a shift. You know, many of our science teachers have used similar methods of teaching, but they might not have called it phenomenon. But now that what was called the NGSS, and now it's NISLS, New York State Science Learning Standards, because New York State has added some of their own things to the NGSS. Phenomenon basically is, if you think of science analogous to, there's different medium through which light travels: water, air, and if you think of phenomenon, it's different ways to look at a hook or something really interesting, some type of phenomenon where teachers can teach science using that as the focus. And it has a lot of different tentacles through which teachers can actually take the students. So an example might be using a capillary tube to watch how water defies gravity and moves upwards. And a science teacher might be able to teach how water moves upward through a plant in the different capillaries, talking about different surface adhesion, cohesive properties, and you know, science teachers can take that phenomenon and go in all different directions. So it's a very broad-based method of teaching where, you know, Scott, when you talked about how has the AP or some of the assessments changed, well, the AP has already changed in science. Now, New York State standards and the way that the reads are going to be offered are going to be more like the AP, which is inquiry-based, and they might not necessarily train the students on a specific phenomenon, but they'll train students on different skills and approaches so that whatever phenomenon is presented to them, they'll be able to navigate through it because they think and act like scientists.
So it sounds like a framework like Jen Layden explained, where you're giving kids a way to think about science, and the skills and knowledge grow out of that process. And the board's heard a lot about mathematics. We'll talk about that as well, and I think a similar way. But Lisa, let me ask you, in your goals, you do talk about moving toward problem solving, reasoning, and thinking deeply in favor of memorization and quick computation. So are you telling me that the way I learned math was wrong?
You did better than Spanish.
That depends, how much Spanish versus math. So I think it's important that we recognize that mathematical fluency is still a thing. And if we look at the Common Core standard, that's something that's still recognized. The goal really is, how do we get that fluency in a way that's meaningful for students? So similar to how Melissa talked about learning foreign language, fluency in math is no different. I would argue it's better and more long-lasting to learn mathematics through an immersion with it as opposed to just memorizing. And so that's what we're encouraging students to do, whether that's through our rich tasks whether that's through our place-based or experiential learning, or whether that's through just kind of grappling with a difficult problem.
So what's a rich task?
So we define a rich task as something that is low floor, high ceiling, meaning it has entry points for all students, and all students can access it and take the mathematics to a variety of different levels. The last little bit of it is that it has what we call mathematical residue, and so that's not something that's physically left on you, but emotionally you walk away, and you have that mathematics that is long lasting, and that's really our end goal, so that hopefully 20 years from now you're not going, why did I learn all this stuff, or I don't remember all of it, but there's that, at least those big picture residue that's left with you.
And the board knows, we've talked a lot to the board about our shift in the mathematics pathway starting at the middle school, and we're now 3 years into our students having that experience, 5 years working with our faculty on that. So we have our first cohort of students who experienced that shift in the middle school now in 9th grade. So it's early in the year right now, but what are you noticing about either the students in 8th grade or into 9th grade now going through our new pathways?
So number one thing you'll hear from our teachers is the students are so much better at digging into a problem and being risk takers, which is great. That's something that I know we've done a lot of work at HCC to encourage, and it's paying off dividends at the high school. As a chair, I will tell you, and hopefully my department's not watching this, but the thing that I love the most is the debates that go on in the department now about what is appropriate challenge for different students and making sure that we're meeting the needs of all students, especially with the wider range of students that are coming in now. With this new Algebra 1 course, we have 3 very veteran teachers, all with different pedagogical strategies, and all of their voices get heard, and I think to me it all kind of comes together into what I consider the best educational outcome.
So I guess for that change that was made, I guess what is the right point to look and say, this definitely made a positive difference, or, oh, maybe there's something else that needs to be tweaked? Do we need, is it waiting a couple more years, or is it now, or?
I think it's ongoing for one, so I guess the question is, what are we looking at? What are the metrics upon which we evaluate that success? Which I guess I'll throw back to Lisa and Kim to talk a little bit about what are you seeing with students learning and understanding, and are there other metrics we'll be looking for in the future?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Toyota just-in-time model of change management, so I like to look at things as they go on, not just kind of wait. So one of the benefits we have of, for example, working with like the University of Michigan in our place-based learning is we have a research-based institution that gives us not just qualitative but quantitative data. In terms of our shift in the acceleration, right now we are going both off of qualitative and quantitative data. The quantitative stems mostly from our state scores, which have only increased. And then our qualitative go from the comments that we're hearing both from the teachers and the students. But I will tell you, if you look at 7th grade, even as Tim said, it's their 3rd year through, but they are just constantly revising. And that's not even just from year to year. I mean, it's period to period. Period 1 happens, they meet together, they debrief, and they make changes for the next class.
It would be interesting over time for you to look at what was the data surrounding the decision to do this in the first place, and what does that specific data look like right now? You know, with numbers of kids who weren't achieving by the time they were juniors.
Yeah, so we'll review that data once we get to that point in a few more years, because we were looking at, if you'll recall, we had, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 in 5 students by the time they got to junior year were receiving a C, D, or F, who were in the accelerated program, and that was just unacceptable to us. And also 5% of our students were not taking math their senior year. And only accelerated kids. Those were kids who were identified in middle school as being strong students. That seemed like a real loss to us. So that's one thing we're shifting.
Yeah, if you look at ultimately the number of kids that end up in A, B, or B, C, either one, by the time they're seniors.
Yep, that would be another way to quantify it. And then there's also the student experience. Can you talk a little bit to remind the board what is different about how the kids learn math? Let's go to the middle school and talk about 7th or 8th grade. What's different than how it used to be, and why is that better?
So if you went to an 8th grade classroom, you might see a lesson being given by multiple teachers at one time. So it could be students are broken up into different groups, and depending on what students are ready to learn at that moment, they would go to a certain room and have a certain variation of an experience. So that might be one way it would transpire. Another way would be that the students would remain in with their regular class cohort, but the activity itself would lend itself to different levels of mathematics. So for example, students might have a scenario, they might need to solve it, but solve it in myriad different ways. So they could use like a tape diagram, which if anyone is elementary or middle school kids, you might be very familiar with those. You might have a bar graph, you might have a linear equation, you might have an inequality. So all of those could come from one particular problem. We've even had some 8th grade students that acted out. So we have students that are, for example, 2 kids racing at the same time in the hallway, and one's kind of going very slow and the other is going a little bit quicker, but they're all keeping proportion true to the actual scenario. So for every 3, let's say, segments on the floor, one person travels, the other person travels 1.
And so Scott, we might also see, as Lisa was talking at the end of this year, these students will have that second option at the high school to accelerate, and that was part of the design as well. So we'll see the number of students who choose that, and then how successful
Can I ask,
they
what
are.
is the assessment, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
What's the assessment process for that 9th grade class now, as the first group going through with that change? So how will they be looked at this year?
So what we tried to do is model it very much on what happened at HCC, one, because we found that was successful, and also 2, because the students are familiar with it. So they'll have 4 different components. One is their in-class assessments, where they'll have an opportunity to do enrichment problems that are not factored into their grade, but just merely an opportunity to demonstrate knowledge past what would be on a traditional assessment. We will have rich tasks, so the students will come in and either individually or in groups do presentations, and there's a rubric associated with that. There's student journaling in response to things that go on in the classroom or reflections that they have on their work. And then last are problem sets, and also not just students solving the problems, but reflecting on their work in those particular problem sets, and all 4 of those feed into it.
So in a moment, I'm going to go to Chris and Kim to talk about what the impact of all this has on the building as a whole and the shifts there. But first, let me jump to our youngest mathematical learners, and I'm going to Mary Beth, because as you know, we're in our 3rd year of a new K-5 mathematics program. So to stick with the math theme, so you're hearing Lisa describe the way math is being taught and the way students are accessing math and learning math at the middle and high school. What are you seeing with our youngest learners in K-2 school with mathematics? Is it aligned? Is the program that we chose out of sync, or is it in line with what Lisa's
I
described?
think we're doing some math residual here. Purposeful. We're really noticing a lot of our students are really have a stronger content knowledge. We're also seeing a lot more mathematical discourse. So, for example, just recently I was in a 1st grade classroom, and a partnership, they were playing a game, and it was called 1 or 2 Less. The boy rolled a 9, and he said, I'm going to use the count back strategy. 9, 8, 7. The answer is 7. And then his partner said, I'm going to check you on the number line. And he went back and said, yes, you're right, the answer is 7. So students are using more than one strategy to solve a problem. There was also another partnership. They were playing roll and record, and they rolled an 8 and a 4, and the girl had to realize we start with 8, then we have to take away 4, and she said, well, that's easy. It's just backwards addition, because 8 take away 4 is 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8. So we're seeing far more conversations in mathematical discourse around math and problem solving with investigations.
So by discourse is having kids talk about math, and they can do that at that young age.
Yes, they really can, and they do it quite well.
And we're focusing this year as we're starting now to look at the math program in our 3rd year to make sure we're really differentiating for all the different learning. And Lisa talks about it through this use of a rich task, but it sounds like a similar idea, not necessarily through tasks we call it, but we call them games, as
Yes.
you described it.
Yes.
And is that how differentiation is done, and what's the role of the teacher in that process? So it sounds like the teacher has to really pay attention
Absolutely.
to what the kids are saying and doing.
Most definitely. Through math workshop, there are various different centers. So students, what we're finding is there's a lot of choice. And we're finding that students are really choosing what they need as a learner. So they can choose an enrichment activity or an activity that might be a reinforcement activity, or sometimes it could be some small group work with the teacher. As Tim mentioned, a lot has to do with teacher being the facilitator, trying to facilitate some of that discussion. Tell me how you got that answer. How do you know that that might be the answer? As well as our students continuously are really proving what they, how they came up with their answer by maybe using manipulatives or their number lines, their base 10 frames. And the teacher really has to observe, a lot of observation, what mathematical strategies they're using, and then they use those observations and the children's work to plan lessons for the next day and small group work too.
It sounds more collaborative. It sounds like there's more of a foundation, so they're more confident with
Far
their
more
skills.
collaborative.
And
It's
they're
more
more confident to take
conceptual.
risks. Yeah.
I was telling Mary about this. I'm amazed. So I'm hitting all levels of investigations. I've got one, my oldest didn't go through it at all.
Okay.
My middle one is in his second year
Yes.
of it.
Yeah.
And then my first grader has had it now for 2 years, but from the beginning.
Mhm.
And he is the only one that he does it all in his head. I mean, I still count on my fingers.
Yeah.
And he is doing
Don't tell the
everything in
auditor
his but he's doing it all in his head. It's amazing. And if you ask him how he's doing it, he's
can explain it.
picturing it. But he's seeing it in pictures. He's not seeing it in like 1, 2, 3, 4. He's seeing
With like
the concept.
the
Yeah.
base 10 frame and how they fill it up, absolutely.
It's amazing. He thinks about it differently
Because
than
he
the
feels
other two.
confident that he can like build these pictures in his
But
head.
it's a much more conceptual program than
It is. In
than
fact, Jenny
the
Murray,
others
she
went
just
through.
had a really good example. She was in the classroom today and she was telling me like exactly what you're saying, how the kids were picturing something.
It's
It was
amazing.
Sure.
Today.
Oh, sorry.
But no, recently. So I was in Nicole Cavallari and Laura Zornman's class, and the children were looking at 2 tens frames, and there were 8 discs in one frame and 5 discs in the other. And they just sat the kids down and they said to them, tell us what you see, tell us an equation, and how you know that. So one of the kids raised their hand and they said, well, I see 10 plus 3 because I know I can take 2 discs from the bottom and make a 10 up top and add those 3, and that's how I see it.
Right.
And then each child had the opportunity to explain what they saw and had the opportunity, some cases they named a strategy. In this case, when the children saw it, to take the 2 up top, then the teacher helped them to name that and said, so you see making a 10 to add on.
Right.
So in that way, each child has the ability to explain what they see and how they figure out the answer. And for those kids who maybe still need to do the counting, that is still in this series of being able to explain how you're thinking it. They're able to hear kids do it in a different way, and that way they add that tool to their toolkit. And they have that strategy to build on.
So it's really grounded in the idea of concepts. It's letting kids talk about the concepts, think through these big ideas, see different ways to do it, and the skills and knowledge, the skills and the rote procedures can come later. And the research shows that that's the best way to learn is through first concepts that rote. If you learn the other way, just rote first, it's harder to acquire the concepts later.
Right.
And that's sort of the foundation that it's based on. So there's a lot of shifts in the way we're learning through our academic subjects. You can hear this all driven by what we know is best in terms of learning for kids. Some of it, is following College Board recommendations, as well as the literature on that. And so I'm sure it has profound effects, Chris, on just the big picture of managing a building and how kids learn. And when you're learning rich tasks, when you're diving into historical events, I imagine these things taking more time. And so does our structures at the high school fit the way our curriculum is shifting? It's a leading question. So let's just put that out there. Answer that any way you want. Go. So,
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for that lead-in. So the instructional shifts that are taking place, those things are just one aspect of what we are looking at in terms of the high school master schedule. And I think it's all leading us to ask that big question, what do we value as a school? And if we look at high schools throughout history and throughout our country's history, they reflect the needs of the country and society at the time. So many of the things that we see with our current schedule, they may be antiquated. They may go back to a time when different things were needed. And what we have done is, with the work with Challenge Success, looking at that data that we brought in, looking at the overall numbers for student engagement, purposeful engagement, overall health and wellness of our students, instructional shifts, we really need to take a look at what our schedule is doing for us and for our students. So how our kids, how we get them to utilize their time and what we're asking them to do are really the fundamental things that we're doing here in school. And pictures are pointing towards a need for us to alter our master schedule to be more aligned with the things that kids need at this point, either through through the globalization, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, leadership, as well as their overall contentment in the building.
So some of this grew out of some work 2 years ago when we brought in Challenge Success to survey our community.
Yes.
Some of the learning there and those data points. What steps are you taking right now to look at the master schedule? Who are you talking to? What have you done, and where are you going next?
Yeah, so we know that obviously the master schedule, it is something that represents the values of the community. So last month, as a start, we worked with the senior members of the Global Scholars program, and we brought in an organization called World Savvy for a design challenge. And we presented the struggles that we've been having with our current master schedule and some of the things that we would like to see in an ideal schedule to our students. And they conducted empathy interviews over the course of a day with administrators, other teachers, other students. And
These
at
were
the end,
seniors, by the way.
yes,
right?
they're seniors.
And
Yes,
they've experienced, at least 3 years of our
yes,
schedule.
they've been through it from the time.
They won't benefit, but they've experienced it, so
Yeah.
they know.
So they all agreed that 26 minutes was not enough to eat lunch. So that is something that is a universal understanding of our master schedule. But the interesting thing about that design challenge was that they actually presented 9 different schedules that are all different than the one we currently have. And that's coming from them going through what they would want and what they would need out of a master schedule. So there were 9 different things. Nobody came up with the one that we currently have right now because, like I said, I think there are challenges that it presents. I think that it does not always align with the deep types of instruction that we would want our kids to have. It doesn't always align with what they will need when they graduate, either in college or in the workforce. So those are things that our students understand, and we're going to be working with additional stakeholders to get their opinions on it as well. Tomorrow morning, we are lucky enough to have alumni, employers, parents of graduates, parents of first-time parents in the building, district administrators, building administrators, Challenge Success members, all being interviewed by our faculty and staff to try to understand what we really do need to value in our master schedule. And it's an ongoing process, and we want to make sure that everybody has a say going forward in what we need.
Have you been able to talk to some other high schools, whether it's regionally or in other parts of the country, just to see what some of the experiments have been and what's worked and what hasn't? I mean, we're going to be unique to ourselves. We have to come up with our own solution, but I'm sure we can learn from others.
Yeah, so I would say that the trend in in the region are moving more towards longer periods of time in class and more student allocated time. So whether that be they can advocate to go and speak to a teacher, or they can go and do some of the work that they need. We know that our kids in this region are so oversubscribed. If you look at the amount of time, one of the things we did at Challenge Success was have them do their the time wheel, where they basically filled up all hours of the day. And for our kids to do all the things that they would need to do, they would need 28 hours in most days. And where does that extra 4 hours come from? It comes from their sleep. And we see that takes a toll on a kid's overall student experience over the course of a year in high school. And so what we are seeing is a trend more towards more time on instruction in the classroom, more free time or student allotted time during the day, and longer periods of lunchtime.
What was interesting with the 9 different student proposals, they worked in groups and within one day came up with these 9 proposed schedules, some having some really great ideas in it. I think it was 4 or 5 groups all came up with a structured time. That was this flex time. It was almost like a scheduled time that they could use for different purposes. One of which was meeting with teachers. Kids want more access to teachers during the day, knowing that mornings are sometimes hard to get here. Earlier in the morning before our early start time, it's hard to catch after school because they have commitments, whether it's athletics or other extracurriculars or jobs. So that was an interesting piece to us.
You're gonna have to get all the teachers to have that free time too.
Well, they'd have to somehow rotate
Yeah.
that through. It's complicated and would have to work through something, but they wanted, that was an element that really struck me as being interesting.
Yeah, because when you look at if you're playing a sport, or if you have an extracurricular that's as intense as a sport, another extracurricular, and you're taking a full load of classes, really you're doing your homework between 8:30, 9 p.m. and midnight, 1 in the morning, which would be okay if we started at 9 a.m. or 8:30, but we don't.
Right,
So
exactly.
it's really, the way it's constructed is really deeply problematic when it comes to sleep, for sure.
Yeah, we run on the idea of the most important things in the high school. What are we teaching? How do we teach it? And then how do we assess it? Right? So those 3 things are the foundation of everything that we do. And if we don't have a model that allows us to do that efficiently or in the most efficient way, then we really have to rethink the way that we're doing that. And so right now, I think we're at a point where we're over, I think, 26 years with this schedule, that maybe the time has come for us to look at something different.
Kids are saying very insightful things too, like, why can't we all be free for lunch at the same time? Doesn't that make a lot of sense that maybe during lunch, if lunch is extended a little bit, I know that my teacher is also having lunch. Like, this isn't my teacher teaching another class because I'm in the A lunch and the B lunch, but it's a drop one day and now you're trying to figure it out. I called your secretary today to figure out what time one specific student has lunch tomorrow because Andrew Taylor and I are meeting this student and it took like 10 minutes.
To figure it out.
I'm not
They
kidding.
get it.
So this is me
They get it.
finding a
They
kid.
find it out.
They do, but they can't figure each other out and they can't figure
Right.
their
They can only
teachers
figure
out.
themselves
They can
out.
figure themselves out, which doesn't really help,
Right.
And what does it say about our culture? You're not eating to have time to be with people, to relax, to decompress. You're eating on the run to get to somewhere else, and all those other people aren't even available because they're entangled. So-
Yeah, if we look at it, we have 49 minutes, 7 times a day, where we're asking them to shift gears in the course of 4 minutes, 7 times a day. So that just in and of itself, the structure of that gives you a picture of what these kids are going through. And last year we had 17 faculty members actually shadow our students, and they were all exhausted by the end of the day. And we don't know whether our kids are just so used to it that they are sort of immune to how much we're asking them, or whether it's something that we're just older and we can't do what we used to do. But it is something that we're going to look to continue doing this year, where we have our
And
students
we train them
shadowing.
well, we've been overscheduling.
That's right,
overscheduling
that's
them
right,
since they were
exactly
three.
right.
Do you
Exactly
think they'll
right.
have the stamina to have these longer periods?
Yeah, well, that's the other part of it, right? It's gonna be a transformational change that would require a lot of professional development for our teachers as well. And we have some teachers right now who are already doing it. If we look at our science teachers, every third day, they have the kids for an hour and 50 minutes, just about. And so they already have a lot of routines in place. They have a lot of structures that they can utilize. So there are people who we've worked with in the past who would come in to work with our faculty to help us, do a better job if we did go to the longer period
I
of
guess
time.
they've done that at HCC where they've blocked off periods that could be put together.
All of our 8th graders are currently in the hour and a half model.
When you engage kids in a task that they care about and when they're really
They want to stay into it.
dive into real learning. I was in the robotics classroom at the end of the period today, and the bell rang, and kids were going off, and a few kids were still working on their robots, and Mr. Lichten looked up and said, "Do you have class now? You should be going to." And they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll get there." Because when they get that engaged, they want to just stay with the project for a while. It's hard for them to break away. So we would have to certainly shift some elements to it, and I think all the teachers here, the chairs can speak to seeing that happen in your classrooms when you engage in that real-life learning.
What's a realistic time frame if we were to implement a different schedule? Like, what would the process look like, and how long would it take?
So this year at all of our faculty meetings, the arc of the year is around what would be the best master schedule for us if we were going to shift. So theoretically, at the end of this year, we would at least have one or two that we might look at a little bit deeper. And then next year, going into next year, we would really focus on professional development around the needs of that new schedule. And then we would try to test it out sometime at the latter part of the 2021 school year. And then best case scenario, we would open it up in September of 2021. We're not married to that at all, and we really want it to be something that we build a critical level of consensus around.
And build the capacity to teach in whatever model that is. So if you're going, for example, with a long block of time, you have to start helping teachers make that shift of what that's going to look like in the classroom. So we would spend time in training people and piloting this in some way.
And I guess after you go through figuring out the best methodology of the schedule for teaching and learning, the next test is, can you have that schedule and still offer the same course choice to students, especially given the fact that enrollments come down a bit because we have so many great courses. So that'll be, I guess, at some point something to layer into the thought process.
Yeah, so I think having that choice, that's something that is one of the assets of our schedule. Students can take, they have 8 choices. If you look at electives, they can even get it up to 9 in any one semester. So we know that anything that we do can't really affect our ability to get the college acceptances that we have been getting, to sort of promote that higher level learning that we've been able to do. We don't want to give up anything for something that we're going towards. There may be trade-offs. It may be that our teachers will have to focus a little bit more on that actual class period, and maybe they don't see them every day. Maybe they see them every other day. But it's certainly a possibility to offer as much choice and still do the great things. My colleague Christina Wilson in guidance has been looking at different models at different colleges and speaking to different college counselors to see if there is really any influence of a school schedule on its acceptance rates to different schools.
So it's complex. Chris is committed to going slow. He's bringing in a lot of people, and he's got this big day planned tomorrow morning.
Bagels.
Bagels, starting with bagels in the morning, so get our car fresh. So I want to start.
This reminds me of something. When in one of my first few years of teaching, my principal commended me to people and said, Jen Mora, at the time, Jen Mora is an exemplary teacher. If she's teaching The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, she knows exactly how many days it takes to teach that unit. And when I look back at that, I'm like, oh, it's so embarrassing. Right? That should never have been the way it was, but just to show you how much things have changed in this district, that if you had it all mapped out, that you did the vocabulary, this da-da-da, on day one, and on day two, they read this passage, and you map that out over X number of days and you stuck to it, you were a good teacher. You know, we now are asking our teachers to take this antiquated schedule and to do this innovative technology and pedagogy surrounding the work that they're doing and fit it into that. And it's almost like keeping that schedule makes me think that it's no different than the kind of teacher I was in the beginning. You're asking them to do things and you're not giving them the latitude to do it.
Yeah, which was, I think, the right way to shift it. We
Yeah.
have to shift.
It was the right way, you
It was-
couldn't
it's
do
the
it
right
the other
If
way.
we shift the schedule and hope everyone
Yes.
shifts after, that's.
Yeah.
That
That would've failed.
failed. So, but you know, just letting our curriculum grow and exploring the needs and doing what we know is right, I think that's, you know, Chris is like, we have to start looking at this.
Drove it.
Let me, so we have just a few minutes left, we're approaching the hour mark, but I want our other two principals to chime in on something. So we'll go to Kim, who's also, just to talk about, it's similar themes in terms of the work you're doing with, you know, you've been shifting toward problem-based learning and seeing a lot of these academic shifts happening at Crittenden as well. At the same time, really focusing on the development of these young adolescents. And creating healthy mindsets, and you've been making some progress in that way. So you also, like Chris, did the Challenge Success Survey 2 years ago. We're going to do it again this November to see if the data gives anything new or not. We're committed to a few years of monitoring this. Could you speak to any successes or any shifts you've seen from the time you did that work and started to raise some awareness around it?
Sure.
You know, what's happening?
I think that Angela and I both thought that Challenge Success was a great springboard for us. It started to open up our minds and our faculty's minds in terms of, it provided us with some data, how our kids are feeling, and you couldn't argue with it. You understood that there was stress and anxiety that we needed to support, in addition to the successes that were going on. So from that work, and also there was a steering committee that helped us to move forward and provide a focus out of this work. We've seen a number of things. We've seen emotional wellness goals come out of each team, and I can't understate how important that is. There is, or overstate, every student will be impacted by multiple goals where the faculty is more aware of how to develop a stronger relationship with their students. That really was where these goals ended up. So in addition, which we know how important it is to have that relationship with your teacher and that there's a conversation that you feel that you are involved in your learning, not just in group work in the classroom, but also that your teacher hears you, understands you, and teachers do that, the teams do that through surveys, through the student voice circles, through conversations, and that moves us to the student voice circles. That was another element that came out of Challenge Success. Again, we knew the importance of students feeling connected to the faculty, and so we looked into...
And not also to the not only to the faculty, but to themselves.
To themselves.
And it gave us insight that these voice circles were having kids have these shared experiences when they were in silos, you know, and then as they started talking, they're like, oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, me too. That they weren't the only ones that were experiencing what they were experiencing, but that there were other people that were going through the same types of, you know, challenges, successes that they were.
And during the middle school, during this time, it's almost been a really nice perfect storm where we know that there's been problem-based learning and the rigor has changed. What we're asking our students to do is change, and they're more engaged in their learning. But along with that comes some academic stressors, but there's also those social stressors. So these voice circles gave students an opportunity to know that they weren't alone, and for us also to hear this information. And from that work, we were able to do two other things. One is the recognition program. We really know how important it is that we value rigor, and that is something that we continue to do with the honor roll and high honor roll, but we built in 3 other components to support that idea that there's more than just an academic grade experience at the middle school. We also value risk-taking, active learning, and wellness. And so that's part of the recognition program where I think last year just under 300 students were recognized for one of those categories and achievement and success and growth in that category.
How have students responded to that?
Positively. It's just another way. I mean, how could you respond if you were given a positive note, an email was sent home saying, hey, we noticed this, very specific, articulated
an incident in school that was positive, we noticed it and we want to thank you and congratulate you for it. So it's been a real positive experience. And the teams of teachers also see it as an opportunity to support their students and make sure they're communicating how much we appreciate them.
And it goes to that idea that, something we always say in instructional models, that we assess what we value. So in this way, we're recognizing what we value, and if we only recognize high honor roll, that's saying that's all we value.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we recognize all these other elements that also show it's important to us as a school community?
And that was surrounded around our essential questions. So it was slow work that I think even when I was an assistant principal, there was always this tension between the high honor roll, the honor roll, and how we're recognizing our students, and it's evolved through the essential question as well. And then the last piece that has evolved from Challenge Success would be that we understand the importance of an individual growth over grades. Grades are very important, we understand the purpose that they serve, but in our adolescence, it's such an important time for them to value their personal growth, academically, socially, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So for some time, you want to talk about?
Yeah, so for some time, after our first year together, we were like, wow, we only really recognize a few kids at the end of the year. Wouldn't it be great if everybody had this growth? That they could measure somehow their own growth and see that they're all successful in some sort of way. So we came up with the help of some of our teachers, this Project Me, which we're gonna launch next week, which focuses on kids becoming reflective about their own learning, setting a goal, and then following that goal through all of their classes, most of their classes and extracurricular activities or home activities, and seeing how they, through some, goal setting, can become successful in an area that they choose throughout the year.
So at the end of the year, they have a digital portfolio that documents a specific behavior they chose to focus on, a disposition, a mindset, and then at the end, they can celebrate it. Whether it's just in a squad of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that they worked with all year, and that would be the Project We part of Project Me, where they're sharing ideas and successes. And maybe we can eventually include parents in those celebrations. And no matter what, they're going to walk away with a digital portfolio of their thoughts and reflections about their development in this particular area over the course of their middle school years. So it's another emphasis of moving away from grades over to personal growth.
So showing them, so it's really looking at their own thinking. So we're looking at metacognition, and getting them to become self-aware, and then talking about it. So they're talking about the way they learn together with their peers.
And what middle schooler doesn't want to focus on themselves?
With friends.
They record it digitally, it's even better.
Yeah. So we'll be excited to hear how this goes, and I appreciate, it's a big effort and undertaking. I know you put a lot of time into thinking how this is going to play out. And let me bring it over to our WAMPUS folks, and let me ask this question, because we had a change in our leadership at WAMPUS, both the principal and assistant principal changing last year, so you're in your second year at WAMPUS. So what has been some successes that you've experienced, or a success that you feel you've experienced, and what challenges are you facing this year?
Okay. I would just whittle it down to 5 big things.
Whittle it to 5.
Dave and I, when we entered last year, we focused on 2 major things. We really wanted to focus on culture, and the only way to focus on culture was really to set high expectations for what we want in our climate. And the climate every day at WAMPUS is that you're welcomed, you're greeted, and to model the HCC conversation right here, that there are relationships all throughout the building with children, with teachers, with parents, with aides, with custodians, with cafeteria workers. And it's on Dave and myself to model it, and everyone else to follow that lead. What grew from there was, let's work with our children. And we began the community meetings. Really, I think the big goal with the community meetings was to set the bar high for our children in terms of academic and behavioral growth. I always come from the lens of we want caring, compassionate, confident children. We want them to have courage. And if we model that with them in our community meetings, we will get everything out of them because we're showing them that we care about them. So in a nutshell, I think what's happened most at Wampus in the last 2 years is the strong relationships, the climate, the feeling in the climate that it feels safe and warm and welcoming when you walk in. We know you, you know us. And the shift in the culture from, I think, was a really great culture of a growth mindset. Now we've just also added to that growth mindset culture that we have increased our expectations for academic learning, but we've also increased our expectations for our children to be independent and confident learners. And hearing all of this behind me, everything whittles down to reading. And if our children can't read at deep levels, they can't think at deep levels. And that's in every single core academic subject, non-academic subject, and it's on our playgrounds, it's in our intramural program, it's all throughout everything we do. So there, in a nutshell, is it.
It does come to that, and relating the culture to the learning, and it goes hand in hand. Having those high expectations for kids, being able to communicate and articulate, the way they communicate with one another. And Dave, you spoke earlier about the greatest accomplishment you're seeing in the children as well. Do you want to share that?
I think the greatest accomplishment thus far was seeing the last year's fourth graders, so this year's fifth graders, now have a fair amount of independence in the building, that we didn't know we were going to get there as quick as we did, and I think working with all the teachers and kind of really helping the kids be accountable for their own selves each day. They walk by themselves now to classes. They have to sign up for intramurals. They're learning what a schedule is, so to prepare them for middle school. It's on them, and they're holding each other accountable at a pretty high level, which is nice. Our last fifth grade community meeting, we actually started throwing this concept out there of how you look out for one another, and then we kind of left it with them in preparation for our next meeting of accountability. Think about it, how are you accountable for yourself, and how are you accountable for each other? And they're doing a really nice job. So I think the celebration of those kids having those little moments of independence to ultimately prepare them for
What's great about a school structure is we can give them that independence. They're gonna mess up, but we can look at it as an educational opportunity. And that's a good model throughout all our schools, the path we always take. To bring closure to this, does the board have anything else in the goals you want to ask? We touched on a lot.
I'd just like to chime in that the idea of emotional wellness and building a strong foundation for the kids through confidence allows them to achieve some of this amazing academic achievement as they get older. And it's great to see the change over the last several years and the idea of embracing that and whatever's driving that into society, which we all know about, right? I was puzzled a little bit. We don't have any time. I mean, we used to have to type papers now. I mean, so just as a small little anecdote around time management. So I think kids are trying to do more. We're all trying to do more, and that's adding some level of pressure. And I think that the idea of the emotional wellness at the younger grades and getting to know yourself well will create that foundation as they get older. So I applaud all of you for focusing so hard on that. So great.
And listening to kids. In the past, administrators used to listen to each other and not listen to the voices of kids who really now are taking ownership in their learning and taking ownership in their social lives. I had a mother who I met with this morning who told me she has a fifth grade daughter, and her daughter loves lunch. And she said, "What do you love about lunch?" She said, "Well, there are 10 girls in my class, and all 10 of us sit together every day." And the mother said that that was a marked difference from her older daughter's time when she was in fifth grade. She said, "It doesn't matter, we all sit together, everybody's included." And that is, a shift that comes from listening to kids, having community meetings, making kids feel like they're part of a group and respecting each other. And this one mother noticed a difference between that fifth grade child and the child who's now in middle school.
And so what both Mike and Jen talk about, I want to just have one more person speak, and she probably thought she was getting away with that. Speaking, Christina, sorry. But let's bring in guidance. So Christina's serving as our liaison to the guidance department. It's an important department. And the state has taken a K-12 view of guidance, and I've shared with the board the new regulations, and we spoke about it last year, and Dr. McGrath came and presented the new guidance plan, and we've talked about that. So knowing that you've been on that end as a guidance counselor at the high school, really looking at kids' academic, their academic resume, so to speak, and getting them ready for that next level of college. And now thinking back as you take on K-12 and think about what that means and hearing about wellness, does K-12 make sense with guidance to you? And is there some aspect you can maybe describe to us why you think that might be valuable?
Yeah, I think there's so much that you can do when you have access at the elementary school level. You're talking about this today. Even in visiting down at Coleman Hill last year, helping students figure out how to make transitions between being in recess and then being in a class that they don't necessarily want to be in, helping them understand that you have to make these transitions, you have to have these social emotional skills, and you have to get along with your peers, you have to learn how to communicate all the way through middle school, get up to the high school. We expect you to balance so much. We just expect you to have balance, and we don't talk about how does one achieve balance in our lives. And I don't know about you all, but that didn't come, for me until like later in life. And we need to have the time. Getting back to, Chris's point, right now we're seeing students as counselors at 7:15 in the morning and at 2:30 in the afternoon because we do not have time to see our students to talk about these really important things. So, I think all of that is really important, and the much more time we can have with students before they go off to college, the better. We love it.
I thought also one of the processes that was in the packet and guidance, which I thought really made a lot of sense, was just to continue to visit colleges that our kids ultimately apply to and or matriculate to, just to figure out what is on the mind of these admissions offices, as well as how are students doing that are there, and how are they prepared both academically and then just for student life in general, and then bring those lessons back to home. So I thought that was great.
We do. We have a plan this year with Chris to have some of our counselors go out and be very specific about where we're going. And we've also, the colleges don't know it yet, but as they come to visit, I have them on my calendar. If they're a college that I think we should maybe have a conversation with, and I'm making myself available for those meetings after they've met with our students.
Thank you. So I hope the board tonight got a glimpse into how we are trying to address what Scott said to the faculty, when our back to school meeting in August, where we want to strive to maintain the social emotional wellness of our students while continuing to provide a strong academic program. And I hear that and work with everyone every day as I see you doing that work to try to let the academics drive it, but also be mindful of it at the same time. And I think a strong academic program considers wellness, because you have to be ready to learn emotionally. And that's what the research points to, is if you're not emotionally ready to learn, you can't get to that academic rigor. But if you are emotionally open to learning, you can. And so they're not mutually exclusive, but actually they're intertwined very tightly. And hopefully we started to unpack that a little bit for you tonight, and we'll continue to have that discussion with you.
And having sat through this now for multiple years, I think that it's what's really striking, and you're in this every day, so we have a little bit more perspective of like seeing it more intermittently, is that the overall direction of what you just said is so clear, right? That everybody's thinking about that direction, but then every year there's a new iteration and there's new thought processes, and it gets tweaked and it changes. And I think that's the sign of like any great organization, just to try to continue to think and continue to be experimental and change and figure out what works and double down on that, and then what doesn't work, then okay, we don't have to do that again. And I think that process is really important. So thank you for really bringing that to the table.
And I attribute that to our inquiry questions, right? That's where it all started, that we can do that and we can have these different iterations.
Yeah. So I
Tim,
thank all
great
of you.
job.
Thank all of you.
So we will take a 2-minute break. Feel free to.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's great.
So we are going to go back to item 10.2, adoption of the 2020-2021, ooh, that's crazy to say, budget materials.
So we reviewed this information in the Finance Advisory Committee prior to the board meeting, and we're recommending for adoption today the budget development calendar, the budget guidelines, and the Finance Advisory Committee charge, all of which were revised
Yep, and I guess the charge was actually last year we did, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, last year, yep. So I don't know if anybody has any questions after reviewing it, but yeah, we just have recently gone through the charge, and I think it's really comprehensive, and we look forward to the committee being really productive this year. But anybody have any questions before we get a motion to adopt the 2020-2021 board committee charge, and then the calendar?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? All right, excellent. So that takes us to 12.1 enrollment report, the BEDS report.
Yes, I could just keep saying the same enrollment numbers over and over every time we hear it.
This is the official one, though.
Yeah,
Maybe they went up
the
now.
official one, 2278, is different than the 2286 on opening day. So BEDS enrollment is just that snapshot on that one particular day. We could have 100 kids who were absent, but that, whatever it is, it's our snapshot. So that's what we report into the state, and that we do every year. It's actually a rather large process when we do BEDS. This BEDS Day enrollment is the smallest part of it. The largest part of it is making sure that every teacher is connected to a course code that they are qualified for. It runs the gamut in our accountability to the state. So, the basic educational data system is much more than just this number, even though it's the one thing we talk about all the time. So, consistent in enrollment. So that's it for BEDS Day.
Great. All right, so.
Next is board goals.
Board goals. So I guess I was not at the last board meeting. I know there's a discussion about it. Ira had suggested one change, and then you waited to vote until now. And I looked at it, I thought it was perfectly reasonable and makes sense. So I think if anybody has any new thoughts or edits or questions, feel free to raise them. Otherwise, we can vote to adopt them.
Are you comfortable voting without them? Because we know that they're...
Yeah, I think so, given that, unless we had some different change tonight, then I think we should just, yeah.
They didn't email you any changes?
Nope.
Based on?
Great, good. All right, so with that, I would ask for a motion to adopt the board goals.
So moved.
Second. All right, all in favor? Great, all right. So, go to staff reports.
All right. Wow, that came fast. So first,
Really?
First, we've all been together since 5:30. All right, first, talking about a few student-related things. We did have our homecoming week, and although we were rainy on a few of those nights, by the grace of something or the other, that field was finished, and it was dry enough to put those lights on. I mean, this was really up until the last moment of, can the new track withstand the weight of these lights, or are we canceling homecoming? Believe me, we ran the gamut with our emotions, and checking pressure on the track, and everything worked out really well. The kids had an absolutely phenomenal time. I want to thank the boosters. They really came out in full force with not only free popcorn and waters, but they also had gone to Bees Cakes and gotten snacks for every kid. They had 850 bags of snacks for the kids to come out after the pep rally and grab snacks. They really made it quite a special event for us.
It wasn't like this a couple of years ago, right?
It gets better and better.
I mean,
Every
there was
year,
a lot-
yeah.
traffic
It's
down
bigger and
22
bigger.
to get
It was
in-
very
to get
special.
here. It was unbelievable.
We had an outpouring of people, and a lot of people who came to the games, which was really nice to see. A lot of students at other students' games, which is fantastic, and not just your typical Friday night football game, but every game. So
The community building's working.
yeah, it's great. I love those community events. Next one is I happened to go to the Armonk Outdoor Art Show, and I just want to commend our art students for their display there. This is one of the largest professional art shows in the country, and our students have a booth at this art show, and people frequent the booth, and it was really great to just go there and see all of the work that they're doing. And as I was walking around, so many former parents who are now facilitating that art show and who still feel very connected to the schools because they see our student work there. So I want to thank our students for their participation in that.
Amazing talent.
Oh, incredible talent. Some other student highlights, we had a bunch of students, I can't even say their names because there's so many of them. The music department announcing accomplishments of student musicians, 13 orchestra, band, and choir music students will be performing in the Westchester County Area All-State Ensemble next month. Wow. It's very competitive. They're ranked and chosen by their NYSMA scores from the previous year, and they're really proud to have such a great showing of all of these kids going this year. And you can actually purchase tickets to the SUNY Performing Arts Center, and it is Thursday, November 7th at 8 p.m., open to the public. Another thing that I attended was the World Languages Induction Ceremony, where we had students in French, Spanish, and Italian who were inducted. We had an incredible keynote speaker, one of our current seniors, who talked about coming to this country and not speaking English and how he learned to master English and how he one day wants to be an English as a new language teacher. Cool. So it was really just a beautiful keynote speaker. And next things, Board of Education retreat topics. You'll note included in your packet are some questions that are going to be guiding our board retreat. This year we are going to be doing it with, we're having two professionals who really have done a lot of this work in other districts to come to work with us. One of them is Ken Mitchell. He is a former superintendent, and he is also a part of the Lower Hudson Superintendents Association that I'm a vice president of. And we also have Susan Wolin, yep, who is a former Bedford board member, exactly, and very heavily invested in Westchester Putnam School Boards during the time, and they are going to come and facilitate our retreat. I'm very excited about that. And the other is, I just want to remind the board, I don't want to end the night like this, but remind the board that we promised that in November we would look at the naming policy.
Is Robin coming back?
So, it's something, it's not a joke. We haven't been kicking the bucket down the road. We really needed time and space to get away from it and to come back to it and look at it again. But I just want you to know that because it will be in the next board packet for all of us to look at, review, and have questions about before we come together.
Did we leave it that we were going to bring it back to the policy committee though? I thought that's what we said.
I don't think
I don't think so.
Because we had to decide on that like general direction of, do we want to make changes to it or not? And if we do, high level, what changes? And then it goes back if the answer is yes.
Because perhaps the board might say, I don't think we need any changes to it. And then it doesn't go to the policy committee at all.
Okay.
And if it does go, it has to go with some direction. As, what are areas that we're looking at for revision? Yep. So that will be coming. And I also want to talk about the Byram Hills Education Grant Cycle that just started. Meetings happened with all of the teachers and their faculty meetings. The Education Foundation has just been incredible in our buildings, working on our projects with us, so we really appreciate them. Another thing is we had a teacher recognized, I love when this happens, when I receive a letter from a university, this time the University of Chicago, telling me that physics teacher Paul Beacon received the University of Chicago's Outstanding Educator Award.
Wow.
He was nominated by a student, which was really pretty he's spectacular, so it was very special. From a student who is currently at University of Chicago.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's terrific.
That's amazing.
It is. And just a few other things. I went to the first meeting of the President's Council of Northern Westchester Hospital to meet and greet the new executive director, Derek Anderson. And I'm interested in that group. I was interested in that group from the beginning and continue to be interested to see. We have a few students who are on the Junior President's Council from our school, but how can we kind of make greater connections? We have a really great local hospital, and this could be an opportunity for many of our kids to do different things, so keeping that connection.
Are you thinking like internships and that kind of stuff?
I don't know yet.
Wellness Day.
Yeah, they've
There's
participated in Wellness Day, our kids have participated in that. I mean, I've seen in different communities, very different connections to hospitals. Some of them have been internships, some of them have been, you know, in affiliation with a class and working on specific projects through hospitals, and it would be nice to have all of those resources. I mean, they were showing us their new lab site, which is obviously off-site, but how they used to have to wait a couple of hours for results of a test, and now they're getting test results back in like 10 minutes. So they're really facilitating the process by using high-end technology in some of their labs. So, you know, just neat for our kids to be involved in, whether they're planning to be doctors, engineers, anything, hospital administrators, it runs the gamut.
And they're connected to Northwell Health now, which is
Yes.
even more
Yep.
diverse. So hopefully even mentors for science research, you never know.
Next, I want to thank Tim Kaltenecker. He prepared the Southern Westchester Council of School Administrators with questions to help us remain compliant with APPR. What questions do we really have to have answered for all of us to remain compliant as this goes through its stages and phases? So Tim, you know, put together that material, and I shared that with all of our administrators, and after reviewing it, they had no other questions. They thought, this seems to encapsulate everything we need, right? So thank you, Tim, for doing that. And the last thing I want to talk about is just school aid roundtables. Shelley Mayer wants to take a really close look at foundation aid and the different components that influence that. And so they are asking for people to join some of these committees and these regional roundtables, which our Superintendent's Association will be represented there. They have one in Yonkers and one in Queens, and the others are upstate New York. And that is pretty much all I have.
Thank you to all the administrators tonight. That was such a
They're
wonderful
amazing.
presentation.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Amazing.
I just felt so fortunate sitting here as a board member and as a parent that these people are, you know, the wealth of knowledge and care for the students and the listening that goes on, and just, it all stems from you guys and you know, Tim, what you champion for these administrators and teachers is just remarkable. The partnerships you've established with all the different outside groups that enrich their, you know, the ongoing continuing education is just really, it's just remarkable, it really
It's
is.
never business as usual. Like
No.
they're
No.
constantly working to
I know.
make things
To
better.
make the best better.
Really, really is, it's.
Tim introduced the concept to all of our administrators this year on collective efficacy, and you know, this feeling that you can do more and be more because you have so much confidence in the people that you're working with that they can do it. And I think that that's exactly what you saw tonight.
Yeah.
It supports that. They see each other as well and the work they're doing, and they each drive each other to be better. But they're great people who are always willing to learn, and you know, they just have those students in front of them and want to make the learning experience the best possible. And that's what drives us every day.
Yeah. You know, they're excited about what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's nothing endures when you are told to do something, right? Like, none of that is enduring. So you want it to come with good thought and careful planning.
It's harder that way, but it's better.
But I have to say that this is our board also. Our board is accepting of that. And there are many boards in other school districts that wouldn't allow their administrators to take risks, like have inquiry questions, or move at the pace Chris is trying to move with this master schedule. It has to be slow. We have a board who looked at school start times last year, right? We had 4 sessions of looking at school start times. Now we're moving on to a transportation consultant. We're doing things in a very slow and methodical way, and a lot of places don't have patience to do that, you know, and I think that that would be complicated for us if we had to move at a pace that we weren't all together and collective on.
That'll be our Project May, or Read.
Yeah, that's our Project May.
Patience and our Project May. Our Project May will be patience.
Yeah.
But you see these other districts that jump the gun on things and then it ends up backfiring and
we've seen that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you have more problems than you did to begin with. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that we take our time and look at things.
And Tim models that.
Yep.
Thank you, that was great tonight. So
Yeah.
great.
Phenomenal.
I mean, they're great, but your facilitation's always amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
It was nice to
So
hear
thorough.
from nearly almost everyone, so thank you, that was great.
Any other staff reports tonight? Or?
I think this week is the community book read.
Yes, Thursday night.
Thursday night.
Community book read.
So,
Staff report?
so yes, just quickly, so good news, the turf and the track are done completely. Unfortunately, in the process of doing the track, the vendor that was completing the spray of the track, some red particles on a very windy day got on some cars parked over at the high school. Yes. So in order to remedy the situation, we contacted the vendor, started that process, but here we wanted to get it done as quickly as possible and find a solution. So we took one of our staff cars, brought it to the bus garage, and found a simple solution that used in every detailing of every car was able to get the product off. So we contacted the vendor, and they were willing to set up with a shop and just have people come and get their cars in throughout the day. Really didn't think that was going to be convenient for our staff, our student, and our parents to have to go somewhere else and leave their car. So what we've done is help facilitate this process and resolve the issue. The parking lot right here, we've scheduled students, parents, and staff to drop their car off, and they have we have a mobile
Kelly
detailing
Car Care.
service. Yes. In order to remedy this
Interior
issue.
detailing?
No interior, no interior. But it's helped to kind of quicken this process up. It's at no cost, obviously, to the district or the student, staff, or parents, but the kids or staff can come in, park the car there, end of the day, they pick it up, it's done. So we're kind of cycling through that and try to remedy this issue and put this to bed, but I just want to keep you guys aware.
Which is great, because if my next door neighbor is redoing his driveway and some of that tar gets on my car, I would need to go through the person who installed it on his driveway to get any remediation done, right?
Right. Mhm.
And that's so complicated,
Yes.
and 6 months later, you'd still have tar on your car, but, Kelly expedited it.
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, without it being a liability for us.
Yeah.
That was important. We can't,
Absolutely.
we can make the connections happen, and Kelly's office did all the scheduling of everything.
Right.
But any major problems have to go directly back to Land Tech.
Correct.
Thanks, Kelly, because a problem like that could kind of, without a solution, so it's nice that you.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it on our month long, so obviously. you
Well,
have
because
to-
there was a solution in 2 days.
But I
Yeah, no, I knew
Yeah.
it. Time constraints, I knew. If it was my car, it'd be the same way, so I understood.
All right.
Kelly off
Board
mom, mom,
reports.
Kelly Car Care.
Had a lot of conversations with
Armand
them.
parents.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah. Let's be politically correct there.
Armand parents, I.
Sorry, it's okay.
Okay, so just a couple of quick board reports. The first is that we were just informed by the BHCF that at least for the moment, we need to have 2 liaisons from the board. So it's going to be Mike and Mia. It could be that at some point that'll change and we can go back to our rotational model. It just depends on whether their bylaws stay the same or change, so we'll wait to hear from them on any potential change. The second thing is that there's an event coming up on November 4th with it's the superintendents in the region as well as the school board association on digital citizenship, and Shelley Mayer will be there as well. So that's November 4th. I want to say it's in Tarrytown, but I could be wrong about that.
Doubletree in Tarrytown.
Thank you. And then just recently, I attended an event in Brewster through the School Board Association on a mental health panel in the region, and I spoke about some of the work that we were doing here. There were multiple school districts that spoke about programs that they were working on. So it was a really good, helpful event, hopefully for everybody that attended. And that's what I got.
And Scott's being very modest. He moderated it, and he's being modest again because he's doing the same thing up at the New York State Convention, correct?
The school, we're doing a communications
You're being very
workshop.
modest. So
Thank
thank you very much.
Representing us.
Anybody else have any board reports? All right, then I guess we go to the minutes. So we have 2 sets of minutes to review and approve, the September 17th and the September 26th. We'll do them separately. Why don't we start with the September 26th minutes, which was the 7 a.m. meeting that we had. Any comments, edits on that? If not, get a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? All right.
I'm gonna abstain.
Oh, I
so
should
I'm
abstain,
there.
I wasn't there either.
Then we may have to delay to the next meeting,
But
which is fine.
if you read,
Which is, we could delay to the
We
next
can delay.
meeting.
Because we don't have a
Yep.
quorum.
Yeah.
We need
So
4,
that way
yep,
when I
that's okay.
vote on
It's
it.
not even about reading, it says if you can reflect on it, what happened actually in the meeting and what would be in the minutes, I guess, so you would need to.
Yep.
Oh, right, was it not videoed? It wasn't videoed.
No,
No.
you
It was
can't,
too
if you
early.
don't have enough people to vote,
No.
you just don't.
It's okay.
Yep. And then, okay, so then let's vote on, well, anybody have any changes, edits to September 17th? Okay, I would ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? And I'm going to abstain because I missed that, but we're good because we have 4.
Yep.
All right. So next,
So 926 is going on unfinished business next time?
exactly. Or it'll just go, yeah, in approval of the board minutes for the next, yep. So then I would propose that we go into executive session to discuss 3 matters. 2.1 legal matter, individual employee, 2.2 personnel matter, tenure, and 2.3 negotiation matter, BHAA. And for the minutes, Donna, if you could just reflect the full explanation of the executive session items.
Okay.
But I'd ask for a motion to do that.
So moved?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? All right. And then I guess we technically don't
We'll just tell
adjourn until
Donna.
afterwards.
We'll tell Donna the
We'll
end
tell you
time.
the time.
Yep. All right.
And just so the board knows, we are now putting the legal section from school law after each of the executive session items to show an accountability to a legal reason for having those discussions in executive session.
Exactly.
So it, you know, if it says something like relating to a current or future investigation or prosecution of a criminal offense that would imperil effective enforcement, it doesn't always have to be everything. It's just something contained in
Has
there.
there been
It's just best practice to just so we have full transparency, so that we're, yep, we're keep sticking to
No, we
what
do much
legally can
more than
discuss.
anyone else, Mia, but, you know, we've been asking council, do they think we should write more than what we're writing? And they said, refer to the specific school law item, and then that's enough.
All right.
All right,
Okay, let's.
Jason stuff?
good night.